October 15th, 1976, Long Island, New York. There were no gunshots, no police tape, no public funeral procession. When Carlo Gambino died, the most powerful crime boss in America left the world the same way he ruled it, quietly. No nickname, no headlines screaming his name. And yet, for more than 20 years, every major decision in the American Mafia passed through him, directly or indirectly. He didn't rule with noise, he ruled with patience. Tonight, we're not telling the myth of a gangster. We're uncovering how silence, restraint, and strategy built the most feared crime empire in U.S. history.
Carlo Gambino was born on August 24, 1902, in the small Sicilian village of Caccamo, a place where power didn't come from politics or wealth, but from who you knew and who feared you. Sicily at the turn of the century was ruled by tradition, silence, and men who operated outside the law. Gambino was born into that world. His family had long-standing connections to the Sicilian Mafia, and from an early age, Carlo learned the first rule that would define his life: never draw attention to yourself. By his teenage years, violence was already routine in Caccamo. Blood feuds, vendettas, and whispered alliances shaped daily life. But unlike others who sought reputation through brutality, Carlo observed. He listened. He remembered. Those who knew him later said he wasn't the strongest or the loudest, but he was always watching. In 1921, at just 19 years old, Carlo Gambino left Sicily for America, carrying little more than his instincts and a discipline forged in one of the harshest criminal cultures in the world.
When Carlo Gambino arrived in New York in 1921, America was changing, and so was crime. Prohibition was looming, and the underworld was transforming from neighborhood gangs into organized enterprises. New York City was already home to powerful Italian crime figures, many of them fellow Sicilians who recognized Gambino's lineage immediately. Carlo didn't rise through flashy robberies or street wars. Instead, he attached himself to the right people, most notably the Castellari faction, a powerful Sicilian group that valued loyalty and tradition above all else. He ran errands. He enforced rules. He proved again and again that he could be trusted to keep his mouth shut. During the violent Castellari War of the late 1920s, Gambino survived while many around him did not. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't impulsive. He understood that survival itself was a form of power. By the time the war ended, Carlo Gambino was still standing, and that alone made him dangerous. In 1931, the American Mafia was reorganized after the bloodshed of the Castellari War. Old bosses were eliminated, and a new structure, the Commission, was formed to prevent future chaos. It was during this reshuffling that Carlo Gambino made one of the most important decisions of his life. He aligned himself with Anastasia. Anastasia was everything Gambino was not: violent, unpredictable, and feared for his temper. But Carlo understood something others missed. Power didn't always belong to the man holding the knife. Sometimes, it belonged to the man standing quietly behind him. Gambino rose steadily under Anastasia's protection, becoming a trusted lieutenant and later consigliere. He handled disputes. He studied rivals. He waited. While others chased headlines, Gambino built influence. By the end of World War II, law enforcement barely knew his name. But inside the Mafia, Carlo Gambino was already being measured as a future boss. By the late 1940s, Carlo Gambino had perfected something rare in the Mafia world: invisibility.
While law enforcement focused on loud, volatile figures, Gambino remained absent from headlines and indictments. He avoided public disputes, delegated violence, and cultivated a reputation for reason. That reputation was deliberate. Behind closed doors, Gambino was studying everyone, especially his own boss, Anastasia. Anastasia ruled through fear, and fear had a shelf life. His impulsive killings brought unwanted attention from the FBI, the press, and rival families. Gambino saw the danger long before anyone else did. He didn't challenge Anastasia. He didn't warn him. He waited. Gambino believed power should never be seized. It should be inherited by circumstance. As Anastasia isolated himself through brutality, Gambino quietly strengthened alliances across the commission. By the mid-1950s, the balance of power was shifting, and very few people noticed who was tipping the scale.
On October 25, 1957, Anastasia walked into a Manhattan barbershop. He never walked out. The assassination sent shockwaves through the underworld. Anastasia had been one of the most feared men in America, and now he was gone. What made the moment extraordinary wasn't just the killing, it was what followed. There was no war, no retaliation, no chaos. Almost immediately, Carlo Gambino was recognized as the new boss. That kind of transition doesn't happen by accident. Gambino hadn't pulled the trigger, but few doubted his role in shaping the outcome. He had positioned himself as the safest option for everyone involved, stable for allies, acceptable to rivals, and less visible to law enforcement. In a world where ambition usually left bodies behind, Gambino rose without firing a shot. From that day forward, the family would bear his name and his philosophy.
Most mafia bosses earn nicknames, labels that announce their reputation to the world. Carlo Gambino never had one, and that wasn't an oversight. It was a statement. As boss, Gambino restructured the family with surgical precision. He rewarded loyalty, removed liabilities, and enforced discipline without spectacle. Meetings were short. Orders were indirect. Violence was efficient and rare. Those who worked under him understood that disobedience didn't bring yelling. It brought silence, and silence was final. Law enforcement struggled to build cases against him. Gambino avoided wiretaps, flashy lifestyles, and public disputes. He lived modestly in Brooklyn, presenting himself as a quiet immigrant businessman. Meanwhile, his family expanded into construction, labor unions, trucking, and international rackets. By the mid-1960s, the Gambino family had become the most powerful crime organization in the United States, run by a man the public barely knew.
Carlo Gambino's patience was legendary, but it was not weakness. When challenged, his response was calculated and absolute. In the late 1960s, younger, more aggressive figures within the Mafia began pushing for visibility and expansion. Gambino rejected it. Attention, he believed, was poison. One rising figure, Joseph Colombo, attempted to rally public support for organized crime under the guise of civil rights. Gambino saw the danger immediately. Publicity invited scrutiny, and scrutiny invited prison. He quietly distanced himself, allowing others to handle the consequences. The message was clear. Gambino tolerated ambition, but never recklessness. Those who forgot that rule didn't last long. By the early 1970s, with rivals weakened and law enforcement still struggling to touch him, Carlo Gambino stood at the absolute peak of his power, an emperor ruling from the shadows, unheard but obeyed.
By the early 1970s, Carlo Gambino had reached a level few mafia leaders ever achieved. He was no longer just a boss. He was a reference point. Disputes between families often ended with the same quiet conclusion. What does Carlo think? Gambino rarely attended commission meetings in person. When he did, he spoke little. Others filled the silence, knowing that once Gambino spoke, the discussion was over. His authority didn't come from fear alone, it came from trust earned over decades. He had outlasted rivals, outmaneuvered law enforcement, and avoided prison entirely. The FBI knew he was powerful, but power without evidence meant nothing in court. Gambino understood that better than anyone. He avoided telephones, used intermediaries, and trusted only blood and long-tested loyalty. By 1974, Carlo Gambino was the most insulated criminal leader in America, protected not by walls, but by time.
Unlike most mafia bosses, Carlo Gambino did something radical. He planned for the future. As his health began to decline, he quietly prepared for succession. But instead of choosing a street-hardened enforcer, Gambino selected Paul Castellano, his brother-in-law. The decision stunned many inside the family. Castellano was a businessman, not a traditional gangster. He favored meetings over muscle, profits over reputation. But to Gambino, that was the point. Violence drew attention. Business generated insulation. Gambino believed the next era of organized crime would be one not with bullets, but with contracts, construction, food distribution, labor unions. These were the new rackets. By naming Castellano, Gambino was signaling a philosophical shift. Not everyone agreed. Resentment quietly brewed beneath the surface. But as long as Carlo Gambino was alive, no one challenged his decision. His word remained law.
In 1975, Carlo Gambino's body began to betray him. Heart problems limited his movement, and meetings became rare. Yet even as his physical presence faded, his influence did not. Orders still moved through channels he had designed decades earlier. Those closest to him said Gambino remained calm, never bitter, never nostalgic. He had already won. Unlike so many of his peers, he wasn't fleeing indictments or living in hiding. He was home, surrounded by family, watching his system operate exactly as intended. Law enforcement watched closely, hoping weakness would create opportunity. It never did. Gambino's silence held. No confessions, no informants from his inner circle. Even in decline, he commanded loyalty. For a man who built power through patience, this was the final proof. His empire could function without him speaking at all.
On October 15, 1976, Carlo Gambino died of natural causes at the age of 74. No prison cell, no trial, no handcuffs. For law enforcement, it was a bitter ending. For the Mafia, it was unprecedented. His funeral was modest, no public spectacle, no obvious display of power. Yet behind the scenes, every major crime family in America took notice. A man who entered the underworld as a teenager had left it undefeated. Gambino never wrote memoirs, never sought fame. He left behind no recorded voice, only decisions, consequences, and a family that still bore his name. In the end, Carlo Gambino proved something rare in American crime history, that the most dangerous man in the room is often the one who speaks the least. And the silence he perfected would echo long after he was gone. After Carlo Gambino's death, Paul Castellano formally assumed control of the family. On paper, it was a seamless transition, exactly as Gambino intended. Castellano expanded white-collar rackets, pushed into construction, and emphasized insulation over intimidation. Meetings replaced street encounters. Profits replaced fear. But something had changed. Castellano lacked the street credibility Gambino never needed to prove. Older captains accepted him out of respect for Carlo's decision, but younger soldiers felt disconnected from a boss who rarely walked their neighborhoods. Where Gambino ruled through earned silence, Castellano ruled through structure, and structure without loyalty is fragile. Law enforcement noticed the shift immediately. Castellano's increased visibility created opportunities Gambino had always denied them. The empire still stood, but the foundation was no longer invisible, and in the shadows,
resentment began to organize itself.
By the early 1980s, the Gambino family was divided, not by territory, but by philosophy. Street crews felt sidelined, cut out of decision-making by a boss who favored accountants over enforcers. Among them was John Gotti, a charismatic and ambitious captain from Queens. Gotti admired Carlo Gambino, but not Castellano. To him, the family had lost its identity. Gambino had ruled quietly, but he had understood the streets. Castellano, in Gotti's eyes, did not. While Castellano focused on boardrooms and contracts, Gotti built loyalty the old way, through presence, confidence, and shared risk. The contrast was stark, and history was repeating itself. Just as Gambino once watched Anastasia isolate himself, a new generation was watching Castellano do the same. The pattern Carlo mastered was now turning inward.
Carlo Gambino had believed that business would save the Mafia, but the world had changed faster than he anticipated. Federal laws like RICO gave prosecutors tools they never had during Gambino's reign. Castellano's paper trails, contracts, meetings, records became liabilities. In December 1985, Paul Castellano was assassinated outside a Manhattan steakhouse. The hit was public, violent, and unmistakable. It was everything Carlo Gambino had spent a lifetime avoiding. The message wasn't subtle. The age of silence was over. John Gotti emerged as the new boss, embracing media attention and public image. For the first time, the Gambino family became a household name, not through quiet power, but spectacle. In death, Castellano represented the end of Gambino's vision. The empire still existed, but it no longer followed its creator's rules.
John Gotti's reign brought fame the Mafia had never known, and consequences Gambino had predicted. Media attention intensified, surveillance expanded, witnesses flipped, trials followed. Within a decade of Gambino's death, the protections he spent 50 years building collapsed. Bosses were indicted, families weakened. The commission itself was exposed in court. What Gambino avoided through patience was undone through ego. Historians would later argue that Gambino's greatest achievement wasn't criminal success, it was longevity. He built an empire designed to survive scrutiny. Once that design was abandoned, collapse was inevitable. The contrast was undeniable. Gambino ruled in shadows for decades. His successors ruled in daylight and paid the price.
Carlo Gambino never called himself a legend. He never sought admiration, yet today his name is studied by criminologists, law enforcement, and historians alike. Not because he was the most violent, but because he was the most disciplined. He understood something fundamental. Power doesn't announce itself, it endures quietly. Gambino didn't dominate through fear alone, he dominated through restraint. He knew when to wait, when to listen, and when to let others destroy themselves. In a world that rewards noise, Gambino mastered silence. And that may be why, decades later, he is still remembered as the most feared and most respected mafia boss in American history. Not because he roared the loudest, but because he didn't need to.
Decades after his death, Carlo Gambino still occupies a unique place in American crime history. Not because of spectacle, but because of contrast. When historians compare mafia bosses, they don't ask who was the most violent. They ask who lasted the longest, who stayed free, and who controlled the most while exposing the least. Gambino checks every box. While others chased dominance through intimidation, he chose patience. While rivals flaunted wealth, he lived quietly. And while law enforcement chased headlines, Gambino denied them proof. In modern crime analysis, his methods are studied as a case in disciplined leadership. Criminal, yes, but methodical. Gambino didn't just survive the Mafia era.
He defined its most effective version. And that's why his name still commands respect long after the power faded.
Ask people today about Carlo Gambino, and you'll hear the same themes repeated. Quiet, patient, calculating. No nickname, no theatrics. Viewers, historians, even former insiders often describe him the same way. A man who never rushed and never forgot. Some admire the discipline. Others see cold opportunism, and both are correct. Gambino studied people the way others studied maps. He knew who talked too much, who moved too fast, who would eventually self-destruct. The mythology around him has grown precisely because he left so little behind. No interviews, no recordings, just outcomes. In an age obsessed with visibility, Gambino's absence became his legend.
But this story isn't a celebration. Carlo Gambino's success came at a cost. Violence outsourced, families destroyed, communities exploited. His restraint didn't eliminate harm, it concealed it. That's the uncomfortable truth at the heart of his legacy. Gambino proved that crime doesn't need chaos to thrive. It only needs structure, loyalty, and silence. And that may be the most unsettling lesson of all. Understanding Gambino isn't about admiration, it's about recognition. Recognizing how power operates when it avoids attention, how systems endure when individuals disappear into them, and how danger doesn't always announce itself with noise. Hollywood gave the world dramatic dawns and fiery speeches. Carlo Gambino gave America something far more realistic. No operatic confrontations, no public throne, just quiet decisions that shaped entire industries from behind the curtain. Many believe he inspired fictional crime bosses, but Gambino himself would have rejected the comparison. He avoided drama, avoided exposure, avoided anything unnecessary. If there ever was a real-life godfather, it wasn't the one audiences saw on screen. It was the man who made sure no one was watching at all. Carlo Gambino entered the American underworld as a teenager and left it on his own terms. No prison sentence, no public downfall, no rivals left standing strong enough to challenge him while he lived. That alone makes him an anomaly. History remembers many mafia bosses, but it studies only a few. Gambino belongs to that smaller category, not because he was the loudest or the cruelest, but because he understood the long game. He didn't conquer territory, he conquered time. Carlo Gambino once said nothing publicly, and that may have been his greatest strength. His story reminds us that the most powerful figures in history aren't always the ones we recognize immediately. Sometimes, they're the ones who wait, who listen, who endure. This was the story of Carlo Gambino, the most feared and most respected mafia boss in American history. And this is only the beginning, because there are many more stories like his, waiting in the shadows.